at the CADIAN ball. A short story by Kate Chopin. That big, brown, good-natured Bobint had no intention of going to the ball, even though he knew Calixta would be there. For what came of those balls but heartache, and a sickening disinclination for work the whole week through, till Saturday night came again, and his tortures began afresh. Why could he not love Ozina, who would marry him tomorrow, or Frony, or any one of a dozen others, rather than that little Spanish vixen? Calixta's slender foot had never touched Cuban soil, but her mother's had, and the Spanish was in her blood all the same. For that reason, the prairie people forgave her much that they would not have overlooked in their own daughters or sisters. Her eyes, Bobint thought of her eyes, and weakened, the bluest, the drowsiest, most tantalizing that ever looked into a man's. He thought of her flaxen hair that kinked worse than a mulatto's close to her head, that broad, smiling mouth and tip-tilted nose, that full figure, that voice like a rich contralto song, with cadences in it that must have been taught by Satan, for there was no one else to teach her tricks on that CADIAN prairie. Bobint thought of them all as he plowed his rows of cane. There had even been a breath of scandal whispered about her a year ago, when she went to Assumption, but why talk of it? No one did now. C'est espagnol, most of them said with lenient shoulder shrugs. Bon chien tient de race, the old men mumbled over their pipes, stirred by recollections. Nothing was made of it, except that Frony threw it up to Calixta when the two quarreled and fought on the church steps after Mass one Sunday, about a lover. Calixta swore roundly in fine CADIAN French and, with true Spanish spirit, and slapped Frony's face. Frony had slapped her back. Tiens, beaucoup te va. Esprit de liance, prends a et a, till the cur himself was obliged to hasten and make peace between them. Bobint thought of it all and would not go to the ball. But in the afternoon, over at Friedheimer's store, where he was buying a trace chain, he heard someone say that Alcée Labelliere would be there. Then wild horses could not have kept him away. He knew how it would be, or rather he did not know how it would be if the handsome young planter came over to the ball, as he sometimes did. If Alice happened to be in a serious mood, he might only go to the card room and play a round or two, or he might stand out on the galleries talking crops and politics with the old people. But there was no telling. A drink or two could put the devil in his head. That was what Bobint said to himself, as he wiped the sweat from his brow with his red bandana. A gleam from Calixta's eyes, a flash of her ankle, a twirl of her skirts could do the same. Yes, Bobint would go to the ball. That was the year Alcée Labelliere put 900 acres in rice. It was putting a good deal of money into the ground, but the returns promised to be glorious. Old Madame Labelliere, sailing about the spacious galleries in her white volante, figured it all out in her head. Clarice, her goddaughter, helped her a little, and together they built more air castles than enough. Alice worked like a mule that time, and if he did not kill himself, it was because his constitution was an iron one. It was an everyday affair for him to come in from the field well nigh exhausted and wet to the waist. He did not mind if there were visitors. He left them to his mother and Clarice. There were often guests, young men and women who came up from the city, which was but a few hours away, to visit his beautiful kinswoman. She was worth going a good deal farther than that to see. Dainty as a lily, hardy as a sunflower, slim, tall, graceful, like one of the reeds that grew in the marsh, cold and kind and cruel by turn, and everything that was aggravating to Alcée. He would have liked to sweep the place of those visitors often, of the men above all with their ways and their manners, their swaying of fans like women and dandling about hammocks. He could have pitched them over the levee into the river if it hadn't meant murder. That was Alcée. But he must have been crazy the day he came in from the rice field, and toil-stained as he was, clasped Clarice by the arms, and panted a volley of hot, blistering love words into her face. No man had ever spoken love to her like that. "Monsieur," she exclaimed, looking him full in the eyes without a quiver. Alcée's hands dropped and his glance wavered before the chill of her calm, clear eyes. "Par exemple," she muttered disdainfully as she turned from him, deftly adjusting the careful toilet that he had so brutally disarranged. That happened a day or two before the cyclone came that cut into the rice like fine steel. It was an awful thing coming so swiftly without a moment's warning in which to light a holy candle or set a piece of blessed palm burning. Old Madame wept openly and said her beads, just as her son Didier, the New Orleans one, would have done. If such a thing had happened to Alphonse, the Labelliere planting cotton up in Natchitoches, he would have raved and stormed like a second cyclone and made his surroundings unbearable for a day or two. But Alcée took the misfortune differently. He looked ill and gray after it and said nothing. His speechlessness was frightful. Clarice's heart melted with tenderness, but when she offered her soft, purring words of condolence, he accepted them with mute indifference. Then she and her non wept afresh in each other's arms. A night or two later, when Clarice went to her window to kneel there in the moonlight and say her prayers before retiring, she saw that Bruce, Alcée's Negro servant, had led his master's saddle horse noiselessly along the edge of the sward that bordered the gravel path, and stood holding him nearby. Presently she heard Alcée quit his room, which was beneath her own, and traverse the lower portico. As he emerged from the shadow and crossed the strip of moonlight, she perceived that he carried a pair of well-filled saddlebags, which he at once flung across the animal's back. He then lost no time in mounting, and after a brief exchange of words with Bruce, went cantering away, taking no precaution to avoid the noisy gravel as the Negro had done. Clarice had never suspected that it might be Alcée's custom to sally forth from the plantation secretly, and at such an hour, for it was nearly midnight, and had it not been for the telltale saddlebags, she would only have crept to bed, to wonder, to fret, and dream unpleasant dreams. But her impatience and anxiety would not be held in check. Hastily unbolting the shutters of her door that opened upon the gallery, she stepped outside and called softly to the old Negro. "Gret Peter, Miss Clarice. I wasn't sho it was a ghost of what. Standing up da, plumbing tonight dat away, in." He mounted halfway up the long, broad flight of stairs. She was standing at the top. "Bruce, where has Monsieur Alcée gone?" she asked. "Wait, he gone about a business, I reckon," replied Bruce, striving to be non-committal at the outset. "Where has Monsieur Alcée gone?" she reiterated, stamping her bare foot. "I won't stand any nonsense or any lies, mind, Bruce." "I don't ricklick I ever told you lie yet, Miss Clarice. Mr. Alcée, he all broke up sho." "Where has he gone? Ah, Sainte Vierge, faute de la patience, butor va. When I was in a room, a breshin off he closed today," the darky began, settling himself against the stair rail. "He looked at speechless and down, I say. You 'pear to me like some posson what gwine have a spell of sickness, Mr. Alcée. He say, you reckon? I daddy get up, go look hisself stiddy in the glass. Then he go to the chimbley and jerk up the quinine bottle and pour a great hoss dose onto he hand. And he swallowed that mess in a wink, and wash hit down with a big dram of whiskey what he keep in he room, against he come all sopping wet out in the field. He lows, no, I ain't gwine be sick, Bruce. Then he square off. He say I can mack out to stand up and give and take with any man I knows. A lesson hit is John L. Sullivan. But when God Almighty and a omen joins forces agin me, that is one too many for me. I tell him just so, while I sa making out to bresh a spot off what ain't da, on he Coca-Cola. I tell him you wants little res, sir. He say no, I wants little fling. Dat what I wants, and I gwine get. Ill. pitch me a fistful of clothes and dem her saddlebags. Dat what he say? Don't you bother, missy. He just gone a caperin' yonder to the Cajun ball. The skeeters is fair a-swarmin' like bees round your foots. The mosquitoes were indeed attacking Clarice's white feet savagely. She had unconsciously been alternately rubbing one foot over the other during the darkie's recital. The CADIAN ball, she repeated contemptuously. Humph! Par exemple, nice conduct for a labellier, and he needs a saddlebag filled with clothes to go to the CADIAN ball. Oh, Miss Clarice, you go on to bed, child, get you sound sleep. He low come back in couple weeks or so. I can't be repeatin' a lot of truck what young man say, out here face of a young gal. Clarice said no more, but turned and abruptly re-entered the house. You done talk too much, would ya muff already, you old fool nigger you, muttered Bruce to himself as he walked away. Alcée reached the ball very late, of course too late for the chicken gumbo which had been served at midnight. The big low-ceiled room, they called it a hall, was packed with men and women dancing to the music of 3 fiddles. There were broad galleries all around it. There was a room at one side where sober-faced men were playing cards. Another, in which babies were sleeping, was called Le Parc aux Petits. Anyone who is white may go to a CADIAN ball, but he must pay for his lemonade, his coffee, and chicken gumbo. And he must behave himself like a CADIAN. Grosboeuf was giving this ball. He had been giving them since he was a young man, and he was a middle-aged one now. In that time he could recall but one disturbance, and that was caused by American railroaders who were not in touch with their surroundings and had no business there. Ces maux d'agence du railroad, Grosboeuf called them. Alcée Labaliere's presence at the ball caused a flutter even among the men, who could not but admire his nerve after such misfortune befalling him. To be sure, they knew the Labaliers were rich, that there were resources east, and more again in the city, but they felt it took a brave home to stand a blow like that philosophically. One old gentleman, who was in the habit of reading a Paris newspaper and knew things, chuckled gleefully to everybody that Alcée's conduct was altogether chic, mais chic, that he had more panache than Boulanger. Well, perhaps he had. But what he did not show outwardly was that he was in a mood for ugly things tonight. Poor Bobint alone felt it vaguely. He discerned a gleam of it in Alcée's handsome eyes, as the young planter stood in the doorway looking with rather feverish glance upon the assembly, while he laughed and talked with a CADIAN farmer who was beside him. Bobint himself was dull-looking and clumsy. Most of the men were, but the young women were very beautiful. The eyes that glanced into Alcée's as they passed him were big, dark soft as those of the young heifers standing out in the cool prairie grass. But the belle was Calixta. Her white dress was not nearly so handsome or well made as Phronie's. She and Phronie had quite forgotten the battle on the church steps, and were friends again. Nor were her slippers so stylish as those of Ozana, and she fanned herself with a handkerchief, since she had broken her red fan at the last ball, and her aunts and uncles were not willing to give her another. But all the men agreed she was at her best tonight. Such animation and abandon, such flashes of wit. H. Bobint, mais what's the matter? What you stand in plant-all like old Ma'am Tina's cow in the bog, you? That was good. That was an excellent thrust at Bobint, who had forgotten the figure of the dance with his mind bent on other things, and it started a clamor of laughter at his expense. He joined good-naturedly. It was better to receive even such notice as that from Calixta than none at all. But Madame Suzanne, sitting in a corner, whispered to her neighbor that if Ozana were to conduct herself in a like manner, she should immediately be taken out to the mule cart and driven home. The women did not always approve of Calixta. Now and then were short lulls in the dance, when couples flocked out upon the galleries for a brief respite and fresh air. The moon had gone down pale in the west, and, In the east was yet no promise of day. Oh, after such an interval, when the dancers again assembled to resume the interrupted quadrille, Calixta was not among them. She was sitting upon a bench out in the shadow, with Alcée beside her. They were acting like fools. He had attempted to take a little gold ring from her finger, just for the fun of it, for there was nothing he could have done with the ring but replace it again. But she clenched her hand tight. He pretended that it was a very difficult matter to open it. Then he kept the hand in his. They seemed to forget about it. He played with her earring, a thin crescent of gold hanging from her small brown ear. He caught a wisp of the kinky hair that had escaped its fastening and rubbed the ends of it against his shaven cheek. You know, last year in Assumption, Calixta, they belonged to the younger generation, so preferred to speak English. Don't come say Assumption to me, Monsieur Alcée. I done yeared Assumption till I'm plumb sick. Yes, I know. The idiots. Because you were in Assumption, and I happened to go to Assumption, they must have it that we went together. But it was nice hein, Calixta. In Assumption? They saw Bobint emerge from the hall and stand a moment outside the lighted doorway, peering uneasily and searchingly into the darkness. He did not see them and went slowly back. There is Bobint looking for you. You are going to set poor Bobint crazy. You'll marry him someday, hein, Calixta. I don't say no, me, she replied, striving to withdraw her hand, which he held more firmly for the attempt. But come, Calixta, you know you said you would go back to Assumption just to spite them. No, I never said that, me. You must dreamt that. Oh, I thought you did. You know I'm going down to the city. When? Tonight. Better make hasty then. It's most day. Well, tomorrow will do. What you goin' do yonder? I don't know. Drown myself in the lake, maybe, unless you go down there to visit your uncle. Calixta's senses were reeling, and they well nigh left her when she felt Alcée's lips brush her ear like the touch of a rose. Mr. Alcée? Is that Mr. Alcée? The thick voice of a Negro was asking. He stood on the ground holding to the banister rails near which the couple sat. What do you want now? Cried Alcée impatiently. Can't I have a moment of peace? I've been hunting you high and low, sir, answered the man. Day someone in the road, under the mulberry tree. Want see you a minute. I wouldn't go out to the road to see the angel Gabriel, and if you come back here with any more talk, I'll have to break your neck. The Negro turned mumbling away. Alcée and Calixta laughed softly about it. Her boisterousness was all gone. They talked low and laughed softly, as lovers do. Alcée la balaire. It was not the Negro's voice this time, but one that went through Alcée's body like an electric shock, bringing him to his feet. Clarisse was standing there in her riding habit, where the Negro had stood. For an instant confusion reigned in Alcée's thoughts, as with one who awakes suddenly from a dream. But he felt that something of serious import had brought his cousin to the ball in the dead of night. What does this mean, Clarisse? He asked. It means something has happened at home. You must come. Happened to Maman? He questioned in alarm. No, Nain is well and asleep. It is something else, not to frighten you, but you must come. Come with me, Alcée. There was no need for the imploring note. He would have followed the voice anywhere. She had now recognized the girl sitting back on the bench. Ah, c'est vous, Calixta. Comment va, mon enfant? Ça va bien, et vous, mademoiselle? Alcée swung himself over the low rail and started to follow Clarisse, without a word, without a glance back at the girl. He had forgotten he was leaving her there. But Clarisse whispered something to him, and he turned back to say, "Good night, Calixta," and offer his hand to press through the railing. She pretended not to see it. How come that? You settin' yere by yourself, Calixta? It was Bobint who had found her there alone. The dancers had not yet come out. She looked ghastly in the faint gray light struggling out of the east. Yes, that's me. Go yonder in the Parc aux Petits and ask Aunt Elise for my hat. She knows where it is. I want to go home, me. How you came? I come afoot with the cateaus. But I'm going now. I ain't goin' wait for him. I'm plumb wore out, me. Can I go with you, Calixta? I don't care. They went together across the open prairie and along the edge of the fields, stumbling in the uncertain light. He told her to lift her dress that was getting wet and bedraggled, for she was pulling at the weeds and grasses with her hands. I don't care. It's gotta go in the tub anyway. You've been saying all along you want to marry me, Bobint. Well, if you want, yet I don't care, me. The glow of a sudden and overwhelming happiness shone out in the brown, rugged face of the young Acadian. He could not speak for very joy. It choked him. Oh, well, if you don't want, snapped Calixta flippantly, pretending to be piqued at his silence. Bon Dieu, you know that makes me crazy, what you sayin'? You mean that, Calixta? You ain't goin' turn round again? I never told you that much yet, Bobint. I mean that, tens. And she held out her hand in the businesslike manner of a man who clinches a bargain with a hand clasp. Bobint grew bold with happiness and asked Calixta to kiss him. She turned her face, that was almost ugly after the night's dissipation, and looked steadily into his. I don't want to kiss you, Bobint, she said, turning away again. Not today, some other time. Bon divine, ain't you satisfied yet? Oh, I'm satisfied, Calixta, he said. Riding through a patch of wood, Clarice's saddle became ungirded, and she and Elsie dismounted to readjust it. For the 20th time he asked her what had happened at home. But Clarice, what is it? Is it a misfortune? Ah, Dieu sait. It's only something that happened to me, to you. I saw you go away last night, Elsie, with those saddlebags, she said haltingly, striving to arrange something about the saddle. And I made Bruce tell me. He said you had gone to the ball and wouldn't be home for weeks and weeks. I thought, Elsie, maybe you were going total Assumption. I got wild. And then I knew if you didn't come back now, tonight, I couldn't stand it again. She had her face hidden in her arm that she was resting against the saddle when she said that. He began to wonder if this meant love, but she had to tell him so before he believed it. And when she told him, he thought the face of the universe was changed. Just like Bobint. Was it last week the cyclone had well nigh ruined him? The cyclone seemed a huge joke now. It was he, then, who an hour ago was kissing little Calixta's ear and whispering nonsense into it. Calixta was like a myth now. The one only great reality in the world was Clarice standing before him, telling him that she loved him. In the distance they heard the rapid discharge of pistol shots, but it did not disturb them. They knew it was only the Negro musicians who had gone into the yard to fire their pistols into the air, as the custom is, and to announce Le bal est fini,